Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation by Nami, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. I'm Dr. Smita Nagpal, and I am the acting chair of Saline Alive, the community awareness group that is responsible for tonight's presentation. And some of our members are sitting back there. They've worked very hard to put on this show, and we have some great presenters here tonight. I'm going to try and say their names. Bob Nassar.
Very good, thank you.
Allison Payne, Patricia Doyle, and Alex Hayek. Thank you. So please welcome our presenters tonight who are going to be talking to us about parents and teachers as allies in the struggle for mental illness, with mental illness and developmental disorders. And if you are a teacher who's here tonight, please make sure you sign in to the sign-in sheet at the back so that you can get the credit for attending tonight's presentation. So I'll hand over to our presenters.
Thank you very much. Yes. Do I need a microphone? Can you hear me?
No.
You want the microphone? Okay, we'll use the microphone. Are you going to hold up cards on a 10-point scale?
I'm ready. For the panel.
Well, we'll crank it up. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Bob Nassar. My wife and I live in support of our 31-year-old daughter who was not dealt a good hand in life. She lives with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. To make a long story very short, because you're going to hear a couple of other stories this evening, my daughter did very, very well in school. She was almost valedictorian of her high school class, but she showed some so-called prodromal symptoms. And unfortunately, she went to DePaul University, and 3 days after she arrived, she went into psychosis and has not been back to college since. Our life has been very much up and down, and knock on wood, she is currently doing just beautifully. In fact, she just finished the 40 hours of safe house training, which is incredible, so she can volunteer there. So we're doing pretty well. We're doing pretty good, as they say at the end of the movie Fargo. We're doing pretty good. Okay, I'm an active volunteer with the Nami organization. I'm on the board. Pat Doyle, our past president here, Patricia Doyle, and I are state trainers for our wonderful 12-week family-to-family education class. If we take one thing away from this session, it is please consider taking that class. There's a community in one of the Carolinas, as I recall, where their goal is 10% of the population of that community take family to family. It transformed my life. That's why I'm standing here today. I went from total ignorance about what was happening with my daughter to, oh. So it really helped bring me out into the light of some knowledge about what might be going on. I'm also a state trainer for this Parents and Teachers as Allies program, and with a number of other people, work very hard to bring a 10-week education class for people who live with serious brain disorders called Peer-to-Peer. And we're the first community in the state of Michigan to have this NAMI National Signature Program. And it's going incredibly, incredibly well. We're on week 9 is next week. And there's, even though it's been winter, very little attrition. We're doing some very unique things with it. We have an incentive program where there's a raffle at the end of class to win a $20 Meyer gift card. So we're really doing, and the mentors, they're called the faculty, are just doing an amazing job of calling everyone every week between the classes to check in, how's it going. My daughter happens to be in that class, and I can tell you from at least an N of 1 or from my firsthand experience, it's really helped her life, and I'm really pleased that that's here. So if you know somebody who lives with and might benefit from learning about their illness and learning coping skills and mindfulness skills. And in fact, Alex is one of our mentors. I'm sorry, Alex. And he mentioned that the recovery, the relapse prevention in that is among the best that he's ever seen. So we're really pleased to be bringing that to this state of Michigan. So a little bit about us. We're the National Alliance on Mental Illness, nonprofit. We have just a couple of employees, part-time employees. It's a grassroots organization. We do education, support, and advocacy. So our education, family to family, the peer to peer. We have support groups on the second and third Wednesdays of every month. And we're involved in a number of advocacy issues. Probably the most fresh and important one right now on our table is Judge Christopher Easthope has received a grant about half a year ago to start a mental health court in our community, and it's going really well. There are 40 participants, and they're going to have the first graduation, I think, do you remember, Alex, is it this summer or early this summer, I believe, with the 40 participants. And something else very unique in our community is this, after all, Washington County, to our knowledge, no other mental health court in the United States has had a judge mandate the peer-to-peer class for some, when appropriate, some of the court participants. So we're really excited about that. And like I said, it just seems it's going really well with that court, according to Judge Easthope and his staff. If he could just afford one more probation officer, he could increase the number of court participants. He could double it from 40 to 80. And there probably are hundreds of people in our community right now who are not criminals, but they're in jail or prisons. And they deserve they deserve treatment there, rather than jail. So as the, I think, wonderful head of the National Institute of Mental Health, Tom Insel, says, it's time to turn the corner on this thing, not the key. I've already mentioned about family to family and peer to peer. More information is on the tables, and I think I see a lot of it has already been taken, so that's great. So let me ask, I'll try to make this somewhat interactive. What is mental illness? You don't have to raise your hand, just shout it out. This was the easy question.
Disease of the brain.
Disease of the brain. Thank you. Yeah, we kind of sort of know what it is. And here's a sort of a textbooky type definition: a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, and mood, and can impact their ability to function on a daily basis. So, disease of the brain, there's general consensus, it's biological. And it can result in taking away one's sense of self and a diminished capacity for participating in a fulfilling and successful life. Hard one. What causes mental illness? Lots of things. You were a good student. That's a good answer. Yeah, lots of things. Anything in particular?
It can be genetics. You can have a predisposition to mental illness, and then stressors or certain things can bring it on. Just because it's not in your genetics doesn't mean you're doomed to get it. Environmental influences. So there are a couple of them. Even viruses can bring it on.
Very good. You're going to see that's going to come up on the slide next. But the answer, to be provocative, we don't know. We really don't know what causes these illnesses. We have some ideas, and it can be a combination of genetics, epigenetics, environment, things outside of the body, and trauma. But we don't have a blood test for these people. We don't really know. We're looking at the brain. Not any treatments have come out of that research yet. So a long ways to go. A long ways to go. So I just wanted to be somewhat provocative, but we're still trying to figure that one out. Which demographic is most impacted by mental illness? Who suffers the most? Say again? Go ahead.
Sometimes it's people that don't have a mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah, when one member of your family is ill, your whole family is ill. Yes, thank you. Yeah, and again, just to do, we're trying to be somewhat provocative, but I do want to, if there's anything else besides take family to family and peer to peer, it's an equal opportunity illness. Anybody, anytime, any place can be struck. So that's one of our most important messages of the evening too. It's not a matter of character or willpower or somebody's fault. And in terms of access to care, the one thing there's general agreement on is there is a socioeconomic component. So there's another riff on that, if you will, is, in my opinion, if somebody walks into psychiatric emergency services and says, I need help and I can get help, or they go to their psychiatrist or their therapist and ask for help, there's lots of help available. But there are some people who are so ill they're unaware that they need help. And that gets much more complicated. So then you get into issues of benevolent coercion and civil rights and so on and so forth. A very complex issue in our society. Okay? And as a setup for Allison Payne, unfortunately, it's called dementia precox, early onset of these illnesses. We don't know exactly when it starts. The holy grail is to go upstream on these illnesses and prevent them. We have a long way to go to get there, but it unfortunately tends to strike people at a young age. So, what's this button right here?
I teach and I don't normally need a mic, but I think the acoustics in here are pretty bad. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So, mental health matters. It affects students' abilities to learn, their attendance at school, relationship with peers, physical issues. All of those can be impacted. Facts about mental illness and youth. And this information is from Washtenaw County about 8 years ago. 20% of 13 to 18-year-olds live with a mental health condition. 20%. 17% of high school students seriously consider suicide at some point. It is the third leading cause of death among youth ages 15 to 24. I find these numbers astounding. 50% of children 8 to 15-year-olds who have a mental health condition never receive treatment. And the average delay between the onset of symptoms and getting that treatment is 8 to 10 years. So the sooner you begin and the more accurate the diagnosis early on, the more likely it is that your child, friend, student will receive care and appropriate care. And the sooner the better. Early identification and intervention are essential to recover. The sooner, the better. The risks of not intervening, not helping that child. 50% of students older than the age of 14 with a mental health issue drop out of school. 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system have a mental health issue. More than 90% of children who die by suicide have a mental health condition. So, why is the teacher and why are the schools, why is your role important? Teachers spend a lot of time with youth, and we'll get to the parents. Teachers are expert observers. Information about behaviors at school can help parents and they can help clinicians make a diagnosis. Schools provide the critical link. Schools and teachers are very often the very first people to see that something's a little bit different. Of course, we recognize, and I'm a teacher, I teach at the college level, we have lots of things to do. We are not there as clinicians for mental health. We're teaching a curriculum. We probably haven't had the training or the expertise. Teachers' time is already allocated for many, many things. We recognize that. What Nami is not doing is we are not asking you to become a diagnostician. We're not asking you to be in charge of any person's diagnosis, but we are asking for your help and your awareness with parents and with medical professionals. So knowing the warning signs are incredibly important. I don't know on this thing when it's going to do this fancy thing and when it's not. Sorry about that. So knowing the warning signs are very important. If your child, if your student has seemed withdrawn or sad for more than 2 weeks, or has very strange behaviors all of a sudden, if all of a sudden they're afraid to go to school, some strange fear starts popping up, or perhaps a change in personality, where a child was once an A student on the ball and all of a sudden they're not turning in their work, something's going on, you might want to think twice about what's happening with that student. Warning signs of a mental health condition may also include just noticing that the child has difficulty concentrating or staying still. Some classic signs of ADD, ADHD perhaps. Not eating, throwing up or using laxative to lose weight, or the alternative to that, overeating and binge eating, which has been recognized as a disorder. There's actually been television commercials about that one lately. Repeated use of alcohol or drugs. Why all of a sudden are they using a lot of alcohol or drugs? Trying to harm or kill oneself or making plans to do so. Whether they're telling their friends, posting it on Facebook, all of those are serious indicators that something is going on and should be taken seriously. The academics, which might be a little different from what's going on at home, all of a sudden a student starts to miss class frequently, missing assignments and tests, the quality of work, they get disorganized, or they're so into being perfect and getting agitated about it that it's not quite normal. I teach at the college level. I have a wonderful student. I know she's incredibly bright, sits at one of the front desks. And her attendance lately had been off. And I finally said to her, is something going on after class? And she said, yes, I'm having trouble managing my bipolar disorder. And I'm like, you don't have to tell me everything. You don't have to tell me anything. But now I'm glad I know. Because if I don't know, if there's no communication, and it is rare that a student would be so open, especially at the high school level, but this is an adult, she's in her early 20s. Now I can deal with that. Now I can work it out. And I just said, hey, I volunteer with Nami. I get it. And she hugged me. She had heard about Nami. So noticing something different, maybe that's all the student really needs before they will, open up a little bit. What do families see at home? And this is a short list, I'm sure. Not wanting to go to school. Physical symptoms. My son started getting anxiety when he was about 3 or 4. When he was in, I think it was 7th grade, I ended up taking him to the ER. His stomach aches were so intense. He was in such pain, I took him to the ER. The ER docs were convinced that he had appendicitis. He didn't have appendicitis. He had anxiety. Did the ER docs know that intense stomach aches were a sign of anxiety and mental health issues? Apparently not. So there's a disconnect also and a lack of knowledge also with some medical professionals that we need to be aware of. Sometimes it's just extremely demanding behavior, low frustration tolerance, disrupted sleep cycles, preferring isolation over social activities, and in many cases, like my son, if they start punching the walls and screaming and yelling and swearing at you and doing all sorts of things like that, those are also signs that the child has some serious concerns and issues. when some of these new behaviors last a little bit longer than just, I flunked the math test and I'm really upset, that's one incident, but they're getting upset all the time, it's lasting a week or two, then the parents and probably the teachers would start to notice. Warning signs of suicide. And all of these need immediate attention if they are noticed. If the student talks, writes, or draws about death, that's a pretty good indication that somebody needs to have a discussion. Probably the parent. If they say they want to die or kill themselves, if they say they have no reason to live, they're a burden to others, they start giving away their stuff, they're posting goodbyes on Facebook, one of their friends calls you to tell you, hey, Johnny's acting really weird and he's talking about going away and blah, blah, blah. Take it seriously. Immediate attention, of course, is needed if all of a sudden your student, your child, is looking for ways to attempt suicide. You go on their history on the computer and they're Googling how to kill yourself. It's a pretty decent sign that you need to be involved. If they start to behave recklessly, give away the possessions, perhaps a friend of the child will call you, which is another reason to have a really good relationship and know who your child's friends are, so that they might even have your cell phone. I've gotten 2 calls that have probably saved my son's life because the friends knew my name, knew my phone number. How should you respond? You should respond immediately. Ask, are you thinking about suicide? Some people used to say, oh, if you ask the question, it's going to give them the idea. Trust me, it's not going to give them the idea if they're not suicidal, and they'll tell you. And if you ask the question and they tell you yes, then you try to stay calm. You never leave your child home alone. If this child starts really talking about it, gets agitated, you might want to call 911 if you're home alone with the child, or say, let's go to the ER, let's talk to somebody. And your child might be admitted or they might not be. But it's always best to be safe than sorry. Taking the child to the ER for the first time may actually start the conversation. It may start you on a path of getting therapy, getting the appropriate help. It's not a bad idea. Reaching out to your child, listen and show concern. Do not tell them to, stop acting like this, you're being ridiculous. That's not very helpful. Focus on understanding and be caring and try not to be judgmental. Use I statements. I think I see you being upset about this, or I think you are distressed, instead of you are this, you are that, you're acting ridiculous. Say how you're feeling. I'm concerned about you. Okay? Don't say, you'll be fine. We all go through things like this. You'll get over it. Don't suggest, I think you're bipolar, you're acting really crazy. That's just not helpful. Do consider ways to decrease your child's stress if they are indeed stressed about one particular item. Taking the ACTs, freaking them out. Okay, we don't have to take it now, we'll take it later. Oh, you don't want to go to college right after high school? How about a gap year? There are alternatives. You didn't get straight A's? That doesn't matter. B's and C's get degrees. Well, prime example right here. The stress that we have on our kids to perform can be over the top. And we need to remember, maybe our kid doesn't want to go to the U of M. Maybe they want to become a dancer. Maybe they want to try something else for a while. Remember the alternatives and think about your child and what they want. Ask them what's stressing you out. Maybe we can work around it. For teachers, that says how to reach out to parents. If as a teacher you've observed something specific, well, your child always lines up his pencils and papers and gets very upset if they're out of line and blah, blah, blah. Something that's a little bit different might help with the diagnosis. Sometimes the parent had noticed something, but didn't think it was too different. Maybe they're a first-time parent. They don't know what's normal, quote unquote, normal, or what isn't. It would be very helpful to them to hear what you as a teacher might be observing in school. Communicate empathy and compassion and let the parent know that you are there as the teacher. and emphasize the importance of early intervention. For teachers, how to reach out to parents, don't suggest that the parent is at fault. Don't suggest that their child has a certain diagnosis. That's not your job as a teacher. Nobody's asking you to do that, and it could create some problems for you down the road. It's really not what we're suggesting at all. For students and parents, there's lots of resources here. There's lots of resources on the web. There's many places to find information, and I'll go through some of these, starting with the primary care provider, but sometimes, again, the primary care providers, the ER docs with the stomach ache really don't have a lot of mental health training. So I would take it further, and maybe I'd start with contacting the school counselor, the school psychologist, the school social worker. Your student may have a special relationship with one of those people, and they may know something about your child. Contacting a psychiatrist, although child psychiatrists in Ann Arbor are few and far between, but there's tons of psychologists and therapists. And finding them can be difficult, and you might have to find more than one. But with the expertise of school professionals, the teachers are the frontline people who are going to be able to maybe make some small modifications. Let the child sit at the front of the classroom. Maybe, if necessary, turn the work in late if you've communicated, okay? But communication is the key. Counselors can really help with course selections, maybe dropping the number of classes, providing a safe place. One of our volunteers, a young student volunteer, said that as soon as her school counselor offered that she could go to her office if she was having a mental breakdown day and was feeling overwhelmed and stressed, as soon as that counselor offered it, the student didn't need it anymore. She knew she had somewhere to go if she had to. Just somebody showing caring and compassion. If you really need to leave the classroom and somewhere to go, you can come to my office. That's all it took. Counselors can also obviously help give guidance for college planning, and I prepared something for some of the counselors and at my child's high school and gave a presentation for Nami with some special things to consider. So if you're in that position, I will share that with you. There is an online group called the JED Foundation, which is for suicide prevention, mostly among college students, and transitions.org for high school students getting ready to go to college. Wonderful websites, absolutely wonderful, and I have information from those as well. School social workers will probably know some of the local resources. Nami also has a wonderful, wonderful listing of all of our resources, and it is online on our website. School psychologists should be able to provide empathy, I'm sure that they will, but not ongoing therapy. They are more in the schools for doing testing and whatnot. It's not their job to provide counseling. The head of special ed would be good to talk to if you think that you need to request an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a 504. If your child is having serious issues at school that you think need further work, you could talk to your special ed department about that. Wellness practice, and again, not all schools have professionals in each capacity. Some smaller schools may not have all of those people. Wellness practices to consider that are just good ideas, whether or not your child has a diagnosis, is to decrease stimulation. Try to provide an environment for that child, an emotional and regular environment, where your criticalness, you're being critical of that student and your anger is, try to take that out of the equation. The environmental aspect, cut down on screen time. The American Psychiatric Association recommends limiting it to 1 hour a day. Sleep is huge. There's a whole department at the university on sleep and people studying sleep and depression. I think the minimum number of hours is 6 to 7 hours. More than that is actually not that great. And outdoor activity and exercise, obviously it increases serotonin levels, and it is considered one of the natural medications that can help. Diet is another one. Sometimes there are dyes within foods that can trigger certain things in certain students. So pay attention to the student's diet. Reduce the refined sugar or junk foods. Make sure there's protein in the morning. Can help get kids through the day. It made a big difference for my son. I tried anyway. Vitamin D is somewhat considered neuroprotective. It doesn't hurt to do any of these things, whether they have a big impact or not. Gluten or dairy allergies can be huge, and they're very common and they can cause symptoms. So keep track of that. And then investigate as a parent different therapies. If you do decide your child needs therapy, DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. It's wonderful for children. My son is in a facility in Indiana right now getting DBT. There are 2 DBT centers in Ann Arbor, and it's great therapy. And CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. It has been shown that a combination of therapy and medication works better than either one alone. Sometimes people don't want to do both, but the combination of therapy and medicines has been proven statistically significant to improve outcomes. And again, those are the names of those therapies. For parents, seek a Nami support class or group. I attended basics, then family to family. I helped teach family to family. Knowledge is power. That's all I can say. And communicate with the schools. Communication is key. Teachers cannot respond if we don't know what's going on with the kid. But we can respond at varying degrees, whatever the teacher is comfortable with, whatever the school is comfortable with. You are your child's best advocate. For the schools, developing a policy for handling academic needs as a mental health issue comes up. A mental health crisis could be very short-term or it could be longer-term. Do the schools already have a policy on how you would handle that? Most schools don't, but maybe you should think about it. Back up. Know your policy for online learning. With online classes, some students are having such a rough time with various things, they can't go to school anymore. They could probably take their classes online at home, or a certain number of them at least. So know if the school has a policy. Be clear, some schools have a minimum number of credits for graduation, but most kids take more. But if all your kid can handle is the minimum number, then you need to know what that number is and talk to the guidance counselor about that. The confidentiality thing is huge because not most parents, I know, I didn't want to go around to every single teacher every single semester and say, okay, my kid's stressed out, they've got depression, can you please do this, that, or the other? However, if you feel comfortable, I think one-on-one with the teachers is the best way. But perhaps your school has a policy that comes down from the top that just says, you know, whatever the parent and doctors say you should go with. And then, is there short-term or longer-term planning to help this student handle what is happening? And is it going to be short-term for a few weeks, or short-term for a semester, or is it going to be for the whole year? Okay? Sometimes you just don't know, and you go day by day. So now we're going to have some stories that you will probably relate to in one way or the other, and I hope you will learn from. And Pat Doyle is going to start off with her parent story. We all have one.
Okay, thank you for coming tonight. My name is Patricia Doyle, and I live in support of an adult son who has a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. Schizoaffective disorder is a disorder of thought and mood. And I'm going to tell you my perspective as a parent and what my son experienced and what I experienced as he went through school, and may be able to provide some insight and some help, and at least, if nothing else, it'll make you feel as though you're not alone in the struggle. And sometimes that's the most important thing. So I've been involved with Nami for a number of years, and I became involved after I took, my husband and I took the 12-week family education class, and it was life-changing for us. Up to that point, we were thinking differently about, what to do with our son and how to approach it. And once we took that class, we were on the same path together. And that was our path of acceptance and knowledge, and it made all the difference in the world. And if you're interested in taking the class, you can always, there's cards over on the table. You can pick up a card, a business card, and you can call our office and you can enroll. Okay, so I'm the parent, and I think that another reason I feel that it's important to tell my story is that I really hope that by sharing this, that all of you will be able to gain more awareness and more recognition. Nothing like this was really available when my son was in school. If it had been, there could have been some early intervention, and possibly, you know, his academic career would have taken a different path, and that's really the most important thing. So I think you're all here for the same reason, because you have a concern. And if you have a concern and you're in doubt, you know, never doubt yourself as a parent, because parents really know, and parents really have a gut feeling if there's something going on with their child. And normally you're right about that. So I first noticed changes in my son when he was 2 years old. And I took him to the pediatrician and I said, you know, there's just something different about this child. And I said, he doesn't focus well, and you know, he's got lots of energy, and he just seems different. And I had an older daughter, so I was comparing, and I could see that it was different. So the pediatrician was not very knowledgeable, and he said, well, aren't all 2-year-olds? So the day that I left that office, I knew that my gut feeling was right. I knew there was something different, and that I was going to pursue that. And above all else, I was going to protect my son and make sure I got what he needed. So I trusted myself more than I trusted what other people thought. And in the end, I think that's what we all want for our children. We want what's best, and we really want to trust ourselves in our decisions. So when he was in elementary school, when I look back on it now, of course he had attention deficit disorder, but fortunately he was a pretty smart kid, so he was able to get by academically. And at that time, the teachers didn't really offer anything in particular for him, but they were very accommodating in their own way. And I think each one of them that I remember didn't talk about it, but you could tell that they understood that, you know, his inability to sit still on a certain day probably was something he was dealing with, and was something he didn't have a lot of control over. And I think that's an important part too, is that, you know, all children want to do well. They all want to please their parents. And they all want to be like the other kids. And if they aren't, usually there's a problem. And it is not willful behavior. And that's an important point too, that kids do not do this for any reason other than the fact that they're ill, or they're showing early signs of mental illness. So before my son became really ill and really began to not be able to function very well, what was he like at that time? So, you know, I mentioned he was pretty active, but he also was engaged in sports, and he loved outdoor activities. He was pretty easygoing, congenial, and he made friends easily. He also had a sense of humor. But as time went on, because of his illness and his symptoms, those things diminished and went away. And that was a red flag too. In middle school, academics became much more difficult because now he had to do a lot of independent study and independent work, and that was really difficult for him. And so then we began to be concerned. We thought, oh my gosh, you know, he's going to be going to high school and he is struggling. So as parents, we didn't really have a clue. We thought that, you know, maybe he would outgrow this, maybe he would mature out of it as he got older. So we thought, well, maybe in the interim, if we sent him to a small private school, small classes, lots of attention, that might just be what he needs to get him through. Well, we did that, and he failed miserably. And when I look back at that, he was age 14, I think that was really the beginning of some really early warning signs of his mental illness, 14 years old. So at that point, we didn't know what to do. So we sent him back to the public school, and I think there were a few things that did help him, and he did manage to get through high school, and he did have a little bit of college. And the things that did help him were, there was a high school counselor that kind of took him under his wing and suggested that he go for some outside counseling and therapy, which he did all through high school. And that was probably the single most important thing because it got him through high school. I think without that, he probably would not have graduated. I also had the idea, and the counselor did too, of having him leave the classroom for parts of certain days and go to it was called a career center, it's like a VOTEC, where instead of sitting in a classroom, he could actually work with his hands. He enjoyed that, and he did pretty good with that. The other thing that was suggested was that he, instead of trying to take all his classes during the school year and being kind of overloaded, that he take a couple classes in the summer to make his load easier. And that was also really helpful. So I think those things and lots of support and help got him through high school. I guess what would have really helped too would have been if somebody along the way, could have been the pediatrician, could have been a school counselor, could have been a soccer coach, or somebody who, you know, knew my son and who saw him frequently, could have said, you know what, I think he is really struggling and I think he has some problems. Maybe you should, and at least, you know, provide resources or help. But nobody did, and I don't blame anybody for that. I think this was a number of years ago, and I think that people were not as aware. But I do know, since I joined Nami about 13 years ago, that there is a lot more awareness than there used to be. So things are changing, and that's really good. So what were some of his early warning signs? Like what were red flags? I think sadness at times and isolation. His academic struggles, for sure, that's always a red flag. His change in sleep patterns, and at the time, of course, we didn't look at that as a problem, but it really was. So his sleep was disrupted, so he was more tired during the day, he couldn't sleep at night. He also began to befriend peers who were also struggling, and not necessarily struggling in the same way, but kids who just were looking for others that could understand them. So there was a change in his friendships. The other thing was his loss of interest in the things he always loved, the sports and the outdoor activities and that type of thing. He also began to have mood swings. So, one day he would be sad and wouldn't want to go to school. The next day he would be euphoric and full of energy. So all of those were what we call prodromal or early warning signs. So what feelings did I have and what feelings did my husband have at this time? So I always felt as a mother kind of desperate. So I was always desperate to protect him because I knew it wasn't his fault. And I was always desperate to find help and to look for some kind of a solution. At times, we were kind of embarrassed, actually, because I think people unknowingly thought that it was bad parenting, that maybe we were doing something we shouldn't have done, or we should have been doing something else, or it was his home environment. And so that was a very difficult thing. I think that was one of the most difficult things. I also felt very scared, not knowing how this would all end up. I was worried about his future. And at times I felt very helpless, not knowing what to do. And we felt very alone because we didn't really know anybody whose child was struggling quite like ours was. It just seemed all the other kids were doing well and our child wasn't. And that was a really hard thing. I think that has changed now. I think there's groups of parents that try to find peers who have the same lived experience, which I think is really very supportive. But in spite of all of this, I never gave up hope. I never gave up looking for solutions, and I still never do. I always have hope that things will get better, and they have. Over time, with lots of supports and help, things do get better. But I think one of the most difficult things initially was the fact that, my husband and I didn't agree because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't have the knowledge. We certainly didn't have acceptance because we didn't know what we were dealing with. So, especially when he was a teenager, we did not agree. My husband said, oh, he's immature, he just needs to grow up, let's use tough love. I didn't agree with that, and it caused a lot of contention. But what helped us the most was taking the family education class. Once we did that, we became knowledgeable. We felt we had more power over this whole situation. We were now agreed, we were walking the same path. And I think too, we just felt like there was something we could do, that somehow all this education, we could use this to help our son. So my son did not really receive a diagnosis of any kind till he was, I would say, 20 or 21. So it was many years before there was a diagnosis. And at that time, we were devastated. We didn't know what to do, and that's when we reached out to Nami, and there was a friend that told us about it. And so since then, I've been very involved in Nami. And I think what's helped me personally the most is staying involved with Nami, volunteering, and being with other people who truly, truly understand, people who have had the same experiences or similar experiences. That has been very helpful. So that is my story, and I want to thank all of you for coming. If you have any questions or anything we can help you with, there's cards back there too, and if you want to come up to me and, you know, we can talk, that's fine too. But just remember, you're not alone. There's organizations and there's help out there, and there's other parents who have the same feelings that you do. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay. Plotting and scheming. Yeah, okay, let's do it. All right, where's the microphone? As I said,
Make it an American Idol. I want to introduce Alex Hayek, and he's going to tell a little bit about himself, and then I'll interview him a little bit, and we'll see how that goes. What can I say? I want to just preface this with a couple things. Number one is our planned speaker, Samantha Hunt, got the flu, so she couldn't be here. So Alex and I did a little bit of planning and scheming, so we'll see how this goes. And then secondly, I want to position this, I think, as I've gotten to know Alex, and the more I get to know you, the deeper my respect becomes. I think this may be a story of how it can work, how this thing can actually work. So.
All right, well, my name's Alex, and I have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety disorder, and have had past major depressive episodes. So I guess I'll start from the beginning. So growing up, I was always very introspective and very introverted, reserved, shy, and a little aloof. And while it was never a problem at first, I guess I just had a genetic disposition towards having that type of personality. When around late elementary school, I started having seizures due to a neurological condition, and that caused a lot of fear, understandably, in me. And while those resolved over the course of a few years, the fear stayed. And when you have all this fear and then it's no longer directed at something particular like having a seizure, it kind of finds other, alternate routes to get to you. And one of those was social anxiety. And I found that really started to have the most impact in my life. I would say in high school, I had always had a close, tight-knit of friends, but once I guess social dynamics started changing a bit, I just found myself being more and more withdrawn from other people, and which then in turn impacted my mood, which made me even more withdrawn, and it was kind of just like a vicious cycle that really impacted my quality of life, and also my education as well, because part of being a student is having discussions in class and giving presentations and doing group work, and all that stuff was always very difficult for me. And I would say that after a while, it just starting to get overwhelming to the point where I just really started to isolate myself. Really at very low affect, didn't want to do anything. And finally, my parents, and I was, I guess, not ready or unwilling to accept that I had a problem, even though it was obvious that there was something wrong. So I never really went to seek out help. And my parents, would always ask, like, how are you doing? You seem a little, off or something like that. I would say, oh, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But in reality, I wasn't fine. And it just got to a point where, luckily, finally, they, near my senior year, they finally intervened and said, hey, there's something, wrong, and we want you to go see someone. And I finally agreed. And I'm glad they did, because I think it could have just kept spiraling to a point where, I could have done something that, would be irreparable. But luckily, it didn't get to that point. And ever since then, I got the treatment, I needed, therapy and medication. And I guess I would say college kind of was when I started kind of rehabilitating and overcoming my fears and overcoming my anxieties, and just doing a lot better overall. And yeah, I guess that's all I really have
Good.
planned.
That's
So,
great.
move on to the questions.
So, any thought about what was it? It sounds like it was your parents who helped you so-called turn the corner and seek help.
Yes.
Were there any thoughts about how the schools, teachers, counselors, anybody at school, was there anyone who was helpful to you, or did it just stay under the radar?
Well, I was always, a very high-achieving student, not a troublemaker. So I think most of the teachers just didn't see a problem or didn't notice a problem. So it was never really, never thought to, it never occurred to them that there might be something wrong, even though I was, pretty quiet during class and didn't like or didn't, giving presentations and would never raise my hand. And even though I thought maybe I was outwardly feeling very anxious, they must not have picked up on it that much. But so yeah, I would say for the most part it was kind of neutral. Some teachers, I think, tried to push me out of my comfort zone by, cold calling me or like kind of asking me a bunch of questions. But that only that's not what someone who has social anxiety wants to deal with, and it kind of really only made things worse. I doubt it was out of malice, but it wasn't helpful by any means. But there are other teachers that were more understanding, I thought, or at least were more compassionate, and would try to just make conversation with me and ask how I was doing. And I found that those teachers were the ones that I felt most comfortable being in their class, were the ones that were just had this compassionate awareness towards myself.
Can you talk a little, you don't have to mention names of medications, but can you tell us a little bit about what happened in terms of trying medications and what helped?
So, a lot of times with meds, it's a try. It's not usually the first medication you take isn't the one that's going to solve all your problems. So for me, it was kind of a trial and error type of thing. There was a lot of medications I tried to take that really didn't help at all. But over the course of a year, I finally found a cocktail of drugs, of medications that really did help and really made a big impact, I think, on my life and general well-being, social functioning, all that sort of thing. And I found that the medication really helped me do things that I wouldn't, I would otherwise be too afraid or too anxious to do. So it kind of helped me see myself, be more comfortable doing those sorts of things, and being able to, once I was able to actually do those types of things, like giving presentations. The more I did it, the more I got comfortable with it, and the less I needed maybe specific medications to help me with those sort of things. As it just, I saw myself as being capable of doing it, and so yeah.
What advice would you give to teachers, schools, and or parents?
I think the main advice is just to have this compassionate, awareness, and just being on the lookout for behaviors that are maybe out of the ordinary for, a student, and I think just being compassionate and understanding, and knowing that if there's a child that might be acting out, or a child that might not be participating or whatever, it's not that they're trying to do something wrong. It's usually that there's some underlying problem. So I think just being aware and being compassionate is really key.
And sort of tell us a little bit, where are you in life now?
Right now, I completed my undergraduate education at the University of Michigan. I'm currently doing research on mental illness, specifically bipolar disorder. And I'm volunteering with Nami, trying to give back in a meaningful way, and making connections along the way, helping other people in similar situations. And I hope to be starting medical school soon, to hopefully become a psychiatrist, and help a child or adult or teen that needed help like I did.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to open it up to questions here in a second, but I just want to summarize a couple of things. We're in this together. When we won a national award for this Parents and Teachers Allies program, and one of the reasons we won the award, I think, is we pushed back on them that we weren't comfortable advocating for medications for young people. There are a couple other things about the program. Allison Payne and Pat Doyle have just been incredibly helpful to the design of this session. And so, like I said, we're all spanking our game. I'm going to date myself. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool mom. So, we're the real experts. Parents are the real experts. And teachers are really good observers. They know our young people. They see them every day. They spend a lot of time with them. And, sometimes things are different at home than at school. There's a lot more coming out, I think partly due to some of the social media, about some secret lives that a lot of people are able to lead. And that's not easy to scope out sometimes. And as Allison said, it's all about the 3 keys to success are communicate, communicate, and communicate. And like I said, the Holy Grail is going upstream on the illnesses and trying to prevent. And one of the sayings that I think has resonated with our audiences is that these are sad kids. These are not bad kids. And as Alex was saying, having some compassion and empathy. We don't, it's not easy to walk in somebody else's shoes. And so to go at it with an open heart and addressing this with some compassion, it can make a really big difference. I know Samantha Hunt usually ends her talk with a really powerful statement about how we can make, especially teachers, certainly parents too, but teachers can make a real difference in someone's life. And when that young person finds somebody that they connects with and believes in them, so to speak, and is supportive, it's huge. It just makes a big deal. I wanted to also, before I forget, there's an article recently in the paper about suicide. And excuse me, the theme of it is what they're calling, I can't see, but means restriction. And there was it's one study, but apparently some of the thinking on suicide is it can be very impulsive and it like happen in 10 minutes. So that between the time, like 50% in this one study, 50% of the people who attempted suicide, not necessarily completed it, but attempted it, 50% did it within a 10-minute sort of, impulse. So keep that in mind, that it can happen really, really quickly. And then in terms of means prevention, they're doing some things on certain bridges, like the Golden Gate Bridge, to help prevent guns, access to guns. It's a huge statistic in terms of easy access to guns and suicide. It's very, very, very concerning. And then I know, Allison, you've done some work with the Mott Children's Hospital on lockable pill boxes and stuff. And so things like that. I know with our daughter, we locked up all the medications and it worked, and we still have that locked. We still get just a habit now. Now we have grandkids. So, so anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that suicide is something that we have to take seriously, and we have to take some measures. In some of our presentations, we've had teachers and staff come up to us and use the word epidemic, so it's very concerning. Okay, I think that is pretty much our formal program. And we do have an evaluation form, I think, somewhere in the back. Do we? Thank you, Steph. And thank you, Steph, and the other folks for all your support. Dawn, is it right? And for your help. We really, really appreciate it. Let me ask, we'll open it up for questions. What questions would you like to ask? Just say it loud.
I'm just wondering, I'm sorry. Just what, do you have experience in either special ed or 504 plans? Do parents find them helpful? Do students find them helpful? I mean, what do you hear?
We're not here to say every child with a mental illness needs a 504 or an IEP. It was very difficult to get my son an IEP, and he had it for a while, and then it went away. And when he was in the hospital, at Mott Children's Hospital after suicidal ideation, I remember screaming and crying on my phone in the car to the special ed director saying, he needs resource room, he's stressed out at school. She immediately gave it to him, and it took his stress level way down. So certain things can be done without an IEP, access to a safe place in the counselor's office, et cetera, et cetera. An IEP, they do have to meet certain qualifications, but if you have any thought that your child would need an IEP or it would be helpful to them, even just to decrease their anxiety, then you contact the school counselor, you put it in writing, and then they have so many days that they have to schedule the IEP meeting for. But I think in terms of, and an IEP can have different restrictions such that a teacher would have to accept work, or, if it's part of the IEP, that there would be some allowances made for late work, that an exam could be taken quietly. It might just be something that impacts taking the ACT, that the ACT could be taken over a few days. So a lot of it is stress reduction. It's not a treatment program, but it's to help them succeed academically. And a 504, which is, if you look at an IEP, it's like a donut, and the outside part is the IEP, and the inside hole is the 504. The 504 can follow them to university. So like when I teach, I always say, if you had an IEP or a 504 in high school, and if they had one, they know they did, then see me later if you need any special accommodations. And the accommodations are usually something like more time on tests or testing in a quiet room. But it does follow through to college. Colleges are really good, some of them around here. I've been to some presentations with Washtenaw as well as Eastern Michigan University, have phenomenal disability offices where when the student goes to register for disability, nobody else would even know, and it's very private, and and some of the accommodations are wonderful. So students going on into college, take advantage of that, certainly. And I believe you had a question?
I just had something to share. I came late, but I'm assuming that there's some teachers in the crowd.
I believe so.
Yes, I'm coming from the parent-teacher conference just now, that's why I was late. But I just wanted to just say that I have a 15-year-old, she's a sophomore. And just how much more I'm just relieved, just my mind is a lot more in peace to just see that, how the teachers were understanding how kind they were, and then how much everyone wanted to just help out, just let us know, how we can just accommodate, what we can do, or just listening to us. And some of them had tears in their eyes, just like my daughter just went through the first semester in sophomore year, from just being active, just taking field hockey, and then just all that, like high-level courses, to just somebody who doesn't want to go to school, and then really anxious, and then the teachers are all shocked, all these things happen in such a short amount, but the amount of accommodation, it was such a relief. I didn't know that, but just the counselor in school just like, it's okay, she can come if she's upset, she can come to my office, and then she can just work over there, work her class over there. And she didn't know it either, but she didn't want to accept it at the beginning, but while she went there once, and then when she saw that, what a great, help support was that, and then she wanted to go again, and during the finals, she was frozen with fear, and then teachers were being so helpful, and then it's like even the school psychologists, I'm so proud of her, because last night she had such a hard, evening. And then, like today, she just told me that, she went there to the psychologist's office, and that she didn't take the English test, but she was there for 1 hour, and then talking to the school psychologist. And for the 504 plan, we were just putting together, we had a meeting with the counselor, with the school psychologist, with the 2 of the counselors, and then with me and my husband. And then they were asking those questions about, how things were and everything. So it was, they just put together some information, but they were just trying to just give accommodations, It was just, one of the teachers was a little bit, just when she heard her story, she was just so, melted. She was just so open. So I'm a lot more relieved, but I'm so glad that I went to the parent-teacher conference.
Thank you so much. I think this points to communication. People can't help you if you're afraid, if you're embarrassed, if you're stigmatized. It's an illness. Your child can't help it. Sometimes I have said, I wish my kid had cancer. And I've lost a nephew to cancer and 2 parents. So I can say that. At times, it would have felt easier, that people would have been more compassionate. But that isn't the case, so you have to try to explain and educate and communicate. It is totally, communication is the key. So if you're keeping it to yourself and not sharing what's really going on, nobody can help. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and one thing to add that is triggered, and I learned this from family to family class and just the volunteer work. Unfortunately, the current mental health system is pretty fragmented, and you may encounter a no at first. So what we really try to teach and preach in family to family, use your resiliency skills. And I'll tell you, going through this journey, so many ways it's made me a better person, and one of them is knowing not to take no for an answer, and just keep asking, try to maintain, get more with honey, than lemonade, and so on and so forth. But the resilience skills can be really helpful. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit more about what's the 12-week course? What happens in the 12-week course?
You want to do that one, Pat?
So our 12-week course is actually going on right now. It started, we're running 2 sessions on a Tuesday and Wednesday night, and it's 2.5 hours once a week for 12 weeks. And it is for people who live in support of someone who has a mental illness. So we have parents in the class, we have spouses, siblings, significant others, and there's a lot of medical information in the class. There's also, one of the classes is on communication, how to communicate with our loved one with a mental illness. There's a class on self-care. There's one on advocacy, what someone needs when they have a mental illness as they reach adulthood, and what type of services is needed and what can be helpful for them. We call it Mental Health 101. It's really anything you'd ever need to know.
It's free.
And there's no cost, and you receive a manual of all 12 classes that you can take home and refer to. And but I think one of the best parts about the course is that you connect with other people. So it's all peer-to-peer, and when we facilitate the class, we say, we're not professionals and we're not teachers. We're just like you are. We have this lived experience, and we're all here to learn from each other.
Thanks. Just a couple of comments that you triggered, Pat. In my mind, at a high level, the family to family has two rivers that run through it. One is information about the brain and so on and so forth. But when you mentioned the communication model, there's a lot of grief work. That's the genius of the family to family class, I think, is that notion of coming to some understanding, not necessarily peace, but there's coming to some understanding and somehow a realization that your life may be different for a while, if not forever. And the other thing, we actually sponsored this movie. We flew in the director. We liked the movie called The Sister's Call, and it was about a woman, Rebecca Shaper, who her brother had been living on the streets for 20 years, and all of a sudden she found him and got him some help, and it was really helpful to him. But in the course of helping her brother, she lost, this is a 12-year documentary, she lost the balance with her own family, and her own daughters began to have some challenges. And actually one of the daughters came in to Ann Arbor with Rebecca at the showing. And so the message there of family to family is trying to find the balance. The communications class especially is about the boundary issues, about how much you can accept, and finding that balance between living in support of your loved one and having a life. And that is not an easy thing to come to deal with. Yes, sir.
Speaking of communication, I work with veterans in psychiatry, many of whom are suicidal. And one thing I wanted to point out is that a lot of times people are afraid to talk about suicide with the people they love, their kids or their friends. But studies show that talking about suicide does not increase the risk of it. In fact, it helps you understand where they're at so that you can help them. And many times people who are suicidal want to talk about it, but no one else does. So in an effort to prevent suicide, which is one of the worst things that can happen to anyone, is having a loved one do that, is opening communication with someone who you think is at risk so that they feel it's safe to talk to you about it. Because that's one route for preventing a disaster from happening.
Yeah, it's something I would like to add to that. Thank you. Again, in our work with the mental health court, Judge Christopher Easthope, he's also done the Veterans Court for many years. And so he's learned a lot at the Veterans Court, and it's generalized or transferred to his work with the mental health court. But I think he understands that people who choose to live a better life, people who live with serious brain illnesses who choose to try to recover and live a better life, are every bit the heroes as a veteran. And
Christopher Eso gets that.
I'll add something to that. I meant to find it and I didn't, but this past week I was listening to NPR and there was a young man being interviewed to the Diane Rehm show, and I had missed the introductory aspect of it. There is an app, and there are quite a few apps that people can put on their phones for their mental health and mental well-being. And this young gentleman had been feeling suicidal, didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to phone a suicide number, didn't want to talk to his parents, didn't want to talk verbally to anybody, but he felt comfortable texting. And he was worked through an episode of intense suicidal ideation with this app on his phone and with texting somebody. So I'll try to find that, but it was on the NPR Diane Rehm show. You know, that's something to give to kids. Putting the suicide hotline into their phone is another way. I mean, it doesn't matter if they come to the parents so long as they go to somebody. My son called 911 one evening. Unbeknownst to me, I found out when the police were at the front door, do you have a son, so-and-so? Yep. And I think I flew up to the upper balcony in his bedroom. He had taken pills, and he was nervous about applying or, you know, auditioning for the play the next day, and ended up going to the ER and an ambulance and everything else. We didn't have a clue. And actually, he was released because it was a short-term thing, and he went back to school the next day, auditioned for the play, and got a part. So, you know, short-term stuff. But we didn't know that he had overdosed. Now, what he had overdosed on were my digestion pills, my Prilosec, you know, some vitamin E, nothing that would have really hurt him. But that's when we started locking everything up. We didn't know that he'd been taking pills, you know. Something that we do at the hospital through this program I started called Hope for Kids for the psych ward is providing weekly pill boxes. Give the kids their pills in a weekly pill box, or you manage it and have it available, whatever you feel comfortable with. There's usually not much in there that would be enough to cause death. I think there are some, and medical doctor, there are some medications that might with a week's supply, but most will not. And doctors are hesitant to prescribe the ones that are highly toxic, but have the pill box and lock up the rest. That's a message that I have a support group of 5 parents, and 3 of the kids overdosed on their own pills because they weren't locked up. It happens all the time. So lock up your pills, yours and theirs, and hide the key really well. Anyway, anything else?
I just wanted to add that teachers are clearly a huge link to intervention, to identification, early identification and intervention. And when I have a 22-year-old son who was different from the time he was 2, didn't know what was going on, didn't, you know, and I was always looking for answers, And he got to high school, and he was on the football team, and very strong, put up 400 pounds. Lovable kid, you know, the administrators loved him, but people also, they called him a gentle giant. Don't irritate, you know, don't, he will knock you out if you start, you know, not a teacher, but another student. And so when we see these aggressive behaviors, and then he was forgetting his work in his locker all the time. He'd forget his helmet, he'd forget his shoes, he'd forget this, he'd forget that. And when I would come away from conferences, this is what made me think of it, I was a wreck. I was crying because I was a bad parent. I didn't him do his homework. I was, you know, he was a failure. It was awful. Now, he's 22, it's been about 4 years. I hope things have changed, but, you know, teachers can be that. If somebody could have just said, you know, if they only had some knowledge about ADD, you know, lack of impulse control, losing things, you know, forgetfulness, those kinds of things. And the impulse control is huge. So I just want to, you know, put that out to you teachers. You can make the difference, really make the difference.
Absolutely, thank you.
8:30.
All right, it's 8:30, our time is up. We have lots and lots of things that we hope you take home with you. If you'd like to ask us any questions personally, feel free. Any of you have kids going off to college. If there are some teachers here who are counselors, I did bring an extra program or an extra booklet for you, and I would like to pass that over to the Saline schools. Thank you so much.
This has been an SCTN production.